But then after years and years of trying, I struck lucky, I guess. Eventually, I tried. Somebody told me you should try and, if you are writing short stories, try and get one into Granta. And I said, Granta what? I didn't know. And then I started sending, and for the sort of feel-good aspect of the story, people say, you need to know people and so on to get published. I didn't know anyone. My stories went into the slush pile at Granta. That's the pile that nobody looks at for ages. But eventually they were reading my stories and they always said no. And then one day they said, yes, they'd like to publish it, but only if they could publish my next book. And I said, what book? No, I did. I said, yes, of course. And I think they expected a novel. And then they got, I rewrote some stories. I wrote a new book. It took a couple of years to write. And I wrote this book mainly because I wanted a book that was different from anything else that was around. And since everything around was magic realist and quite big, this was not going to be that. What else did I think about? I wanted a title that, it wasn't the internet days. Those days there was a book called, some of you may know, there was a directory called British Books in Print or something, which actually was all the books in English that are published every year, or forever perhaps. Huge 2-volume thing. And I thought, if I am going to ever get a book published, actually, I knew, actually somebody did tell me, don't bother with short stories, nobody reads them. Don't bother with short stories about islands that nobody can quite place, like Sri Lanka. Who cares? Who knows? What is it? And don't bother anyway with your name because nobody can pronounce it. So I thought it'll have to have a title that can be pronounced. And I wanted a title that nobody else had thought of. So that's how Monkfish Moon came out. I don't think there's still a book called Monkfish Moon, any other books. So that was one reason. So there was a negative thing to be different, and the other thing was that it just changed the way I was writing. But it was fundamentally a mistake. I should have written a novel.
While I want to know about how some of the stories came about in that collection, I want to tell you how they choose the titles now. They go and check out if a website URL is available. If it is not, the title goes. Okay. Anyway.
Right. But you can always make a website URL with your title. You just add a few extra things,
Yeah. The and book. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So tell us about what triggered some of the stories themselves.
Oh dear. I mean, this is ancient history, really. It's 22 years ago when it came out. The reason I can remember it, but it links up with my most recent book, the one that I read from earlier in the earlier session, Noontide Toll. In that what I wanted, actually, at that point I do remember, somebody earlier, I think it was, somebody was talking about the arrogance of the writer, and to some extent you have to have a certain amount of arrogance to think that you're going to write something somebody else would read. But I think what I felt at that point when I was writing Monkfish Moon was that I had grown up not only reading the sort of series stuff, but as I'd grown a bit older, I started reading better books perhaps, or more richer books, more enriching books perhaps. And I was conscious of an imaginative world that I lived in and that other people lived in. And it was an imaginative world which I thought was beautifully liberating, that was beyond time, beyond space. And it was a world in which you could go to places that you could only go through these books. So you could go to India, you could go to Russia, you could go to America, you could go to the south of America, you could go to the 19th century, all these places. And I had, in my own little way, gone to them, including Marquez's Latin America. And the place I hadn't gone to, and I didn't have in this imaginative map, was a place like the place I had grown up in, which was Sri Lanka. And not just, it was my limited reading, because there had been, there are Sri Lankan books around, there had been plenty of them, and there were the Trinidadian books and all of those, which had, if you like, some of that aspect of the world. But I just felt that it hadn't entered my mind, and I wanted to create that. And it's not a unique thing. Lots of writers, I later discovered, had that same impulse. It's a very kind of, now we'd call it a kind of post-colonial cliche, if you like. But the sense that you wanted to enlarge that map in your head, and that's why I wanted that. And the stories came because I wanted a book of this island place, which you might call Sri Lanka, and I wanted to look at it through different voices. And I wasn't a fan of sort of multi-voice novels. Can't get them into my head. I have a very small head for that sort of thing, and so individual stories seemed to me the way. And so I wanted I ended up with a 9th story. I'm sure there was some magical reason I wanted. I thought it was lucky or something, and I wanted these stories to have different voices. And I was very keen, to have older voices, and I was very keen to have a woman's voice in it, a young girl's voice in it. And again, those are things at that time in the early 90s, you're not meant to write outside your own sort of area. And crossing gender was certainly a very risky thing, apparently.
On that note,